Winfrey Owino, KTN News, Nairobi.
Now, priests in the Catholic Church have for over a millennium been celibate under the Code of Canon Law. Well, the head of the world's 1.3 billion Catholics, Pope Francis, now says the law on priestly celibacy can be reviewed. In an interview, Pope Francis has termed celibacy as a temporary prescription. But who can review the Code of Canon Law? Rita Tinina tells us more.
For over 1,000 years, priests in the Catholic Church have been celibate, a universal requirement of the Church that was enforced upon the clergy in the year 1123. According to Canon 277 of the Code of Canon Law, clerics are obliged to observe perfect and perpetual continence for the sake of the kingdom of heaven, and therefore are bound to celibacy, which is a special gift of God by which sacred ministers can adhere more easily to Christ with an undivided heart. But now the millennium-old rule may be open for review. In an interview with Infobay, a Miami-based news outlet, Pope Francis, who is celebrating his 10th anniversary as the head of the Catholic Church, termed celibacy as a temporary prescription.
En la Iglesia Occidental es una prescripción temporal, no sé si se resuelve de un modo o de otro, ¿no? Pero es provisoria en este sentido, que no es eterna.
Asked if it could be reconsidered.
Sí, una cosa que se... De hecho, todos los de la Iglesia Oriental están casados, los que quieren, ¿no? Ahí hace una opción. Ante la ordenación, la opción por casarse o por hacerse.
On whether allowing priests to marry may encourage more people to join priesthood.
No creo. De hecho, en la Iglesia Católica hay sacerdotes casados, todo el rito oriental es casado, todo.
In 2019, Pope Francis had spoken about celibacy, saying he considered it a gift to the Church and did not agree with optional celibacy. There have been growing calls to review the canon of celibacy, the latest from the German Catholic Church, which called for a review of celibacy and the decision-making structure in the Church, among other issues. The current Code of Canon Law, which was promulgated in 1983 by Pope John Paul II, has 1,752 canons. The laws are subject to change, and only the Pope can make amendments issued through an apostolic letter, motu proprio. Pope Francis has amended several laws, among them allowing lay individuals to lead religious orders with priests and making it easier to dismiss a religious member who has been absent without authorization from their community for at least 12 months. But perhaps the review that caught the eye of critics were changes to Canon 395. With the Church facing accusations of sexual abuse by priests, Pope Francis reviewed the law to acknowledge that adults and not only children can be victimized by priests and powerful lay people who abuse their offices, and criminalized covering up sexual abuse and priests grooming minors or vulnerable adults to engage in pornography. The latest statement by the head of the world's 1.3 billion Catholics opens the door for a review of the 1,000-year rule on priestly celibacy. A long-awaited review that may lie in the hands of Pope Francis. Rita Tinina, KTN News.
Well, to discuss that matter for a bit, let's now welcome Richard Kaketo, who's an advocate and convener of the Life Committee at the Kenya Catholic Professionals Forum. Christian Professionals Forum. Thank you very much for joining us,
Thank you, Eric.
Richard. Now, there's, like you've seen that story by Rita, it's talking about the canon law, which has been in existence for about 1,000 years plus, which has basically been discouraging priests from getting into marriage. I'm using those words carefully. What is it that would be informing the Pope now when he says, you know, this basically could be a temporary measure, which is hinting at a possibility of amending it? Why now?
First and foremost, he says it is a discipline. he calls it a discipline.
Yes.
Those are the words he used. And if it is a discipline, it means that it was necessary at a certain point in time that this discipline was necessary. And we have to be careful. Not the entire Catholic Church is not living this discipline. The Eastern churches, which are also in communion with the Catholic Church, allow for marriage.
And which are these Eastern churches?
It's quite a long history that will have to be explained. But when there's a time when the capital was not only Rome, and we had a capital in the Middle East of the church, I think Istanbul, and then Constantinople. Now, there are churches, for example, the Orthodox churches in Russia, in Ukraine, in all these spaces, where they would allow people to, the priests to marry. But if you're going to be a bishop, they would have to choose the bishops from the celibate.
Okay.
Now, the Catholic Church of the Roman Rite chooses its priests from men who have chosen to be celibate. It is not the priesthood that compels celibacy. The process of formation allows you to choose that I'm going to be celibate, then you are available to be chosen as a priest. So what would be informing the Pope? Many things, of course. He came to the papacy 10 years ago as a man from Latin America, outside Europe for the first time. And so he comes with a pastoral approach to his papacy. He comes with an ear of the peripheries. So if he's, in his opinion, he's saying that probably the rule is either throwing away more believers than it is bringing, or it is causing more trouble, then probably reviewing the rule would take place.
But is that what is happening, Richard? I mean, has there been that kind of conversation within the Catholic communion that, number one, that when they are going to look for priests, they don't find many men who have taken the vow of celibacy, that then would say, okay, so we are seeing that we're running short of priests, or those who are priests pushing to have this amendment?
Wow, that's an interesting one. There are spaces in the Catholic Church, jurisdictions or ecclesiastical provinces where there is a shortage of priests. And the decision is, if we have married men who qualify to administer the sacraments, all they need is the proper training. Why not? Okay, that question has been asked in some of these spaces. There is also a possibility of saying, look here, a number of priests could have failed in their celibacy, and therefore, why, other than having them live in sin, why not just remove the rule? But my understanding is, as long as there is a number of priests who are still going into the priesthood, having chosen celibacy first, okay, I think they should be allowed to continue to live celibacy. And even if the canon law were to be reviewed, there will be a category of priests that will not walk that path. Because we have religious priests and we have diocesan priests. We have priests who report, for example, to Archbishop Anyolo as their father in the faith, and he administers the diocese. But we also have priests who are religious. You know, the Jesuit priests, the Dominican priests, the Franciscan priests. Those fellows live in community. If you say that the rule, once reviewed, will apply to them, how are we going to handle families in a community setup? How, you know? So there are priests who are going to remain celibate no matter what the rule will say. So it will remain optional.
Perhaps maybe we should actually take some steps back. What informed this discipline?
Now, the little I read in church history was, and I pick it even from the Eastern churches, the fact that he who becomes a bishop must have chosen celibacy in the first place. I'm told that bishops with their wives would then determine who becomes the next priest or the next bishop, and they end up appointing their sons and daughters and whatever, and it becomes a family thing, denying the opportunity and the service from others. So I think that's why, one of the reasons, it might not be all the reasons, but it's one of the reasons why the discipline was imposed. And it was quite useful, because I'm telling you, it is going to be quite a shocker if actually that review takes place. We have Catholics who are quite conservative and Catholics who are quite liberal. So Catholics who are conservative will receive a shocker, really. It will take some adjustment, really, to fit into the new dispensation. Yeah.
10 years of Pope Francis, as we conclude this conversation. Let's juxtapose what he has just talked about with everything else that's happening globally. The global push for LGBTQ rights.
You're right.
And also that coming into the church and the recognition of gay marriage in church. Then there's a whole issue of, the scandal with the Catholic priests. How do these marry? Is there any sort of dotted line?
The sexual revolution of the 1960s came with a huge impact on the faith, on the churches, etc. The pressure has been going on in the United Nations, in treaty bodies. There's a lot of sexualizing of the entire environment. So it is very easy for someone to think that because of these pressures, then the Pope is yielding. But I look at it differently. The Pope has been a force to reckon with on matters interreligious dialogue, on matters environment, on so many things. So we cannot reduce his 10 years to having yielded to the pressure of the sexualization going on planet Earth. But it's true that these pressures exist, and the offenses and the abuses that happened in the church has atoned for them. I mean, we have dioceses that have closed down. We have churches that have closed down because they have to pay compensation for all these terrible things that happened. Yep. And the Pope gave very serious instructions that if a bishop receives a report that a priest is abusing someone, etc., then the bishop must show that they acted on it within a certain period of time. Some investigation must have been carried out, decisions could have been made. So there's some action that has taken place in terms of reining the priests in. But suffice it to say, we still have very honest priests. We still have very many priests of integrity. They are rarely talked about. It is this one philandering priest, right, that gets publicized and all these things go on. But we need to know that we have priests who are living their core.
Well said, and no doubt. Richard Kaketo Wakili, thank you very much for joining us. Richard is a lawyer and also convener of the Life Committee at the Kenya Christian Professionals Forum.
I'm also a lecturer at the Catholic University of Eastern Africa. I needed to say that.
That too. Mwalimu Wakili. Keep it here. Newsline continues shortly. After this break, we'll tell you what Raila Odinga has said about Monday, the 20th of March.
Just ahead, Azimio leaders vow to continue with next month.